Apologetics. Here we are defending the faith with or without reason, with or without evidence. We're going to talk about apologetics quite a bit. This is our third section in apologetics, and we're going to say, is it something that is really, really important for Christians, or is it something that is just really a sophisticated way to brainwash Christians? Welcome back from Answers in Genesis. I'm Jen, here with Ellen Bondar, as we dive deeper into our Addicted to God series, taking a look at faith and evidence, and today apologetics. So, is apologetics truly about truth, or is it just about brainwashing? So, Ellen, give us about 30 seconds to tell us about your book that is loosely related to this series that we're doing.
Sure. The book is called How to Kill God the Easy Way. And you'll have to read it to see why it's called that. But that's exactly what the book's about. It can't be any more clear, but that's what the book's about. So I encourage you to grab your copy on Amazon. It's in all three versions, Kindle, softcover, and hardcover. So go ahead and grab that. You're going to enjoy it. There's a lot of really awesome stuff there, whether you are a believer, questioning, or an atheist. It's great stuff. And just series right now, Jen and I are loosely based on that, but you're getting so many more insights here that aren't even in the book. So, and vice versa. So I would encourage you to grab that, listen into the series, and be a part of this conversation. Last week, Jen, we left off where you were asking a question. Basically the question you just asked as we were coming onto this show. So, what my thought was as I was thinking about it, you've probably watched atheist and Christian debates. I don't know how many you've watched. And in preparing to write my book, as I was writing it, I watched more debates than anybody should have to endure in a lifetime. But I really wanted this book to be deep. I wanted it to cover as much as I possibly could. So I watched so many debates. And it's interesting because at the end of the day, what ends up happening is they really don't go anywhere. Because the whole debate is about evidence. Can the Christian produce evidence for the existence of God? And so they'll go for an hour, 2 hours sometimes. And then at the very end of it, it comes down to, okay, so you've proven something exists. Can you prove that it's Yahweh? And the answer is always, well, you have to have faith. Oh my God, you just took me for 2 hours trying to prove that your God exists. And at the end of the day, when I ask you, do you have anything to prove that God exists? Because that's what this was about. And your answer to me is, oh, you just have to have faith. You could have told me that was what you were going to say up front, because this didn't help, and it never does. But for the Christian who already has this faith and already believes God exists, they are presupposing it. They come into the debate and they think, oh, see, you got him, you Christian. You defeated the atheist. You proved God exists with all these great arguments. And I can't believe he can't see it. What is wrong with him or her? How can they not possibly see all this wonderful proof that you've just given? Because you already presuppose that this evidence is sufficient to prove your God exists, but it doesn't prove your God exists any more than it proves Allah exists, or the Great Goering, or whatever. But that's how apologetics works, and it's sad. But Christians are so brainwashed; they think that this is evidence when it isn't. It wouldn't stand up in a court of law, not at all.
All right. So I think we had left off in the last episode with just talking about how there are certain Christian apologists who Christians think of as experts in this field. Mm-hmm. And so we had briefly mentioned R.C. Sproul being one of the more well-known ones, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we look at people like R.C. Sproul or John Piper, or, depending on what your particular belief is, the person who defends your faith the best, right? The person who's really, really eloquent at saying why they believe what they believe and why you just follow along on their coattails without actually checking it out to see if it's true or not. So that's kind of where we ended. And those were the kind of people that you watched in these debates. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure.
We were talking about Case for Christ and Reasons Why We Believe, Lee Strobel and Josh McDowell, all these kinds of people that I can't tell you how many times, people have said that they're Christian just because of the book, The Case for Christ. That when I ask for their evidence, that's literally all they do is they give me a link to that book.
Right.
And I'm just like, can you, I read the book too, maybe I missed something. Can you just in a sentence or two tell me what it is that is the actual evidence in that book? So I think this is a huge part of, we're talking about apologetics right now. And in this particular section, we're just laying the foundation for apologetics. And in doing so, we're talking about how much that role of apologetics plays within Christians being brainwashed and how it's circular reinforcement. So that brainwashing is going over and over and over again. They're not really looking at it. They're just trusting the experts. All that kind of stuff is going on. So another aspect of this, how apologetics and Christian brainwashing kind of are interconnected here, is this us versus them mentality. And I know that Christians often either they don't see it or they just don't want to admit it. They just put their blinders on, they put their head, bury it in the sand or whatever. But it's so apologetics is, I think you see this a lot in the debates, whether it's a debate with a Christian and an atheist, or whether it is just, people debating Calvinism versus Arminianism, or, you get into Pelagianism, all these other little isms, that the tiniest little doctrinal differences that people want to debate about. So the more that you study in Christianity, the more you have this us versus them mentality. I saw on Facebook today, one of our mutual friends posting about, is it okay if I have this musical instrument in my church praise and worship service? And all these people having these arguments about it. And I'm just like, why do you want someone else to tell you how to live your life? Right. And in Christianity, there is a huge us versus them mentality, not only whether it's Christians versus everybody else who's not a Christian, or within your little group. And the more you study, the more us versus them, and the tinier your group gets till it's us four and no more. And so this is really what's called in psychology, I think, in-group bias. Am I on track so far here?
Yeah, you're making sense. I mean, everything you're saying seems spot on.
Okay.
You even have the apologists having debates with each other over their apologetic methods.
Exactly. Over the method itself, right? So, it is kind of crazy. All right. So apologetics is really a big deal. The brainwashing is really a big deal. And yet most Christians don't see the brainwashing within the apologetics. And we're going to be taking a look at that in depth as we explore over the next however many sessions that we do on this. Does that sound good so far?
It does. And I just want to make a comment to what you were saying. It actually makes a lot of sense because there is in theism, it naturally invokes an us versus them mentality because God always has to be superior. And if you don't worship our God, then you're on the outside. And that's a very biblical principle. And sadly, even within Christendom, you have our God, and you're on the And I see, oh my goodness, I can't tell you how many times I see Christians come onto my wall to fight against me, and then they have to fight against each other because they can't agree with each other as to what God said in the Bible. And I'm just like, I thought this was about what I wrote. No, it's all about the thing. You know what I mean? That's humanism, on the other hand, is not about if you're not like me, you're on the outside. Humanism is about a corporate idea, like all of us together are trying to figure out life. I don't need to tell you how to live. You don't need to tell me how to live. We need to work together to find a way to have peace with each other, no matter how each of us want to live, and make laws that we can all agree on, that we can work together to make us be free and not hurt each other. Humanism is a wonderful idea because it brings unity. Theism,
Exactly.
complete unity. But of course, Christians and theists in general can't see it because it's God's way or the highway for them. Because a lot of times, as we've seen throughout this, it's a fear of losing out on your eternal life or whatever. So you got to do it. You got to hold on to this staunchly. And I've seen, and I can't tell you how many people come onto my wall, and even recently, one guy, Phil, I forget his Phil, just his last name's failing me right now, but made a whole post on his wall about how he does not need to read my book because he can't believe that I would fall away from God and after writing such great stuff in, the Journey Between the Veils. And so why should he even waste time reading I'm like, because if you're even going to believe remotely in apologetics, the whole idea is to consider the alternative view so that you can make your defense. But if you're not willing to know what the other view is, how can you make a defense?
And that takes us back to the courtroom analogy that we're trying to stick with in this section, right? So if there's two lawyers, they go into this courtroom and one person just dismisses the other one outright. Oh, I don't need to hear it because it's not true. Can you imagine a lawyer going into a courtroom and saying that?
Yeah, Judge, I know I'm right. He's wrong. Therefore, I'm right. Like,
exactly.
That's the argument. I don't need to hear his view. I don't need to hear his argument. I just don't, okay, it doesn't work. Yeah, yeah. It's
so the courtroom standard is where I'm going to try to keep all of these arguments. Are you good with keeping it at that standard?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Yep. All right. Let's talk about doubt a little bit in relationship to apologetics. Do you think Christians ever experience doubt because they have a hard time, giving an answer for the reason that they have this faith and they have this hope? And do you think that ever causes doubt? And how do they feel about that? How does that fit into all of this?
Well, I don't know that I can speak for all Christians, but I can speak for myself. And I can say when I was a Christian, no matter how much I would argue for the existence of God and believed it and had my apologetic arguments or whatever, and was even in Christian college, I would still walk around sometimes, look up at the sky and be like, is there even a God up there? I would absolutely have my doubts. He would just seem so distant because he doesn't exist now that I know this. But at the time, I was just like, is there even, like, am I just tricking myself here? I remember questioning that because it just didn't make sense. But, I stuck with it because I just really believed. As much of the questioning and doubt that I had, I refused to let go.
So when Christians have doubt, is that considered like a lack of faith?
Well, I mean, it depends. If you take John the Baptist into consideration, and Jesus praised him for that. It was okay. So,
all right. So is that, if we could take that a step further, is that like a spiritual weakness or a sin, or, how far did they take that?
I mean, I suppose it depends on what view of Christianity or sect. I mean, if you take the James passage talking about wisdom and apply it to every area of life, then he who doubts is like the waves of the sea tossed around. So yeah, that would be a bad thing.
Yeah.
But
so apologetics, when we went back to our last week's episode, apologetics, we were talking about these are really the experts in giving a defense for why they believe what they believe, right? And if you think about your average Christian, they're not at that expert level, right? And so because they don't have any real evidence of their own, they are only following somebody else, the likelihood that they will have doubts is relatively high.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more that they hear, it almost seems to me like, at least this is how it was at me. At first, when I first became a Christian, it was almost like blind faith, right? You have an experience and then you start learning. And the more that I learn, and the more that I learn, and the more that I learn, the more questions I had, the more doubts I had, the more questions I had, the more doubts I had. And it's almost like the more that I learned, the worse it got. On one hand, right? I knew a lot, but I had more questions. And then those questions are doubt. And that doubt is a lack of faith. So now I don't have that childlike faith anymore. So apologetics is almost like the opposite of the childlike faith that Christians are supposed to have.
It's entirely opposite. It's contradictory opposite. It's completely a contradiction to the concept of faith. I don't know why I'm getting such pushback from this, even from people reading the book. I'm like, what don't you see about this? Is essentially works righteousness. You're proving something that you don't need to prove. You're proving something that's supposed to be based on faith alone. It's completely contradictory. It's almost an embarrassment to Christianity, because it's supposed to be based on faith alone. It's crazy, Jen. I'm floored that that nobody else, well, I should say, but a lot of people can't seem to square that. It just doesn't make sense to me. But as far as doubt's concerned, it's interesting because I will say being a loner is a very difficult place to be. And by that, I don't mean that in the negative turn of somebody who like doesn't have friends. I mean that in the sense of when you think outside the box and you end up to be what you think at any given moment, you're the only one out there that believes something, right?
Yep.
That's a very, very hard place to be. And very, very few of us are capable of standing in that place. But it's even for those of us who can, it's still really, very, very hard. I'm one of these people who's willing to do it, but I don't like how it feels. It sucks. So I'll immediately try to find people, if there's anybody else on the planet that actually sees what I see, because I don't want to be the only one who sees it. I mean, I don't like to feel like that. So I'm always comforted when I find others that are seeing what I'm saying. I'm like, oh, it just kind of brings a relief that I'm not the only one who's like, I'm not losing my mind, so I know that for me, going into preterism was very, very hard because I felt at the time, because I didn't get into it by reading a book or listening to Preston or anything. I figured it out on my own by accident, just studying, and there I was. And I was like, oh, I literally thought I lost my mind. So I'm willing to go there because when I see something, I can't unsee it. And so I just follow the truth where it leads. But it was very comforting to find other preterists eventually and be like, oh my goodness, thank goodness I'm not the only one, right? And then it's a comforting level. Becoming an atheist, much the same way, getting out there, you're just like, oh my goodness, nobody in my family sees this. I have very few friends that are seeing this. And then now more and more and more, I'm like, okay. And so you breathe and you're like, okay, good. I'm not the only idiot out there, But even as a Christian, I can imagine then that, that you feel that way as well when you start to be challenged with some of these questions. And so you have doubt. Even if you have doubt, it's more comfortable to stay in your circle because birds of a feather flock together. And as long as Sproul's still here, Piper's still here, it's a safe, it's still good. They're not seeing it. So therefore I must be okay. Because if they don't see it, then, I'm not as smart as they are. So, you know what I mean? So there's a comfort level in staying comfortable, so to speak. So venturing into this territory and stepping outside that cell that's open finally for you is a very, very, very scary place and very hard place to be. So I understand why you can't follow your doubt past the apologists that are telling you everything is true. Mm-hmm. So I see it. I can understand that and sympathize with that because, like I said, I'd venture to say the majority of people are not like us that are willing to just take that step, even if we don't know there's people on the other side. You know what I mean?
Right. And this is where I really come back to my study of all of the different personality types. And there are only a couple personality types who are willing to look at it in the way that people like you and I did. And most of the personality types, they just can't do that on their own. And that's why we do these series, is to help the people who are not out there studying for yourself and trying to figure this out for yourself. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? Because there are a couple of strange people like us who've already gone there and done all that hard work. But I remember when we were staying with you guys, Alan, for about a week, and you were preparing your sermon, right? and we were talking about it. I can't remember. I think it was before you gave the sermon. Maybe not, because I think you were like up till 2:00 in the morning preparing. So it might have been right after you gave the sermon.
I believe this was about the betrothal thing or something like that. I remember having a conversation with you at the table. Is this where you're going?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you thought, I remember you saying, am I the only one who sees this? I remember clearly you saying that. And it really impressed me that whether you were right or wrong, and I agreed with you at the time, but whether you were right or wrong, you were willing to stand up and give a sermon on something that you had no clue if anyone else in the world believed. Because that's who you were. That's who you are. Right. And you had studied it to the point where you were convinced that this is, what it said, and you went in that way. And I've done some similar things, definitely. But I came into preterism very similar, totally on my own. Wasn't looking for it. I had not even heard of it. And I just thought, it sounds to me like all the prophecies have been fulfilled. And that my first thought was, am I now a full heretic? That's my first thought. I thought, I don't know anybody in the world who believes this. So that must make me a heretic because I don't believe like other people anymore. And it scared me to death. I mean, I was absolutely petrified.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to a friend. I didn't know this friend was a full preterist, but I was talking to I'd never even heard the term at this point, right? But I was talking to him and telling him, and I was scared. I thought I was going to go to hell. and, and I told him, I said, this is what I see and I can't unsee it. Because you get to that point on different things, right? When you're studying something, you just can't unsee it. I said, this is what I see. And I said, what's wrong with me? And he said, there's a name for that, I said, there is? He's like, yeah, it's called
Right.
full preterism. And I'm like, what's that? So he told me. And then I think it was maybe 10 days later, I went to the Kansas City Prophecy Conference. So I'm a brand new preterist. I went to that prophecy conference and I met all these full preterists, including you. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm not the only one. And that was an amazing feeling. But to step out there on your own, all by yourself at the very beginning, that doesn't happen very often, does it, Ellen?
No, it's not. It's a very difficult thing, and not everybody can do that. But Jen, I will say this, and this is, and I hope I'm going to go on a limb here and assume that we still are allowing people into our group that are questioning.
As long as they are going through the process, yes.
Okay, good. So I just plug the group here because if you are in that position that I was talking about a few minutes ago in the general song, and you are doubting is another way of saying something's off here and something's going on. So you're starting to deconvert. If you're in that stage, this is a good group for you because we want to help you do that. You don't have to feel alone stepping out of that cell and into a whole new place by yourself. But just make sure you're in a place where you genuinely are doubting and you're questioning, as Jen just said. It's not a place where you just come in just to challenge challenge atheists. That's not what this group's about. But it is a place to help you deconvert completely and get to a place where you are no longer stuck in Christianity because you think you have to be. You don't have to be. There's another place, and there's a huge community, thousands. So your little church community is not the only community where you can be a part of. So anyway, I just wanted to plug that because I don't want you to feel alone if you're that kind of person that's scared. There is a place where you can come and ask questions and be a part of a journey of deconversion. So anyway, back to you. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, that's good. It is a really good point. And I do hear from a ton of people in that group how much it has helped them along their journey. So people come in at every stage of the journey, but if you're still considering yourself a Christian and you're kind of staying there, then no, you're not ready for our group yet. And so I just want people to know that this is a group for people who already have one foot out the door, right?
Right.
You're all ready.
And the questions you have to answer to join will determine whether or not you're ready for the group, basically.
That's right. That's right.
Christianity community. The link will be below. So but like Jen said, take her advice. Don't just come over if you're looking to just want to, stay a Christian. This is absolutely for you if you are genuinely in that spot where you're ready to go, but you feel stuck because you don't know how to get out. And so my book will help you get out. That's a big part of my book. So I want to encourage you to get How to Kill God the Easy Way if that's you. Because reading that book, I've already seen it 100% of the people who were in your position, if that's you, have completely crossed the line and it freed them entirely. So if that's where you are, this book is exactly targeted at you. So get the book, read it, come join our community, be a part of something great.
All right. And just so you know, we have a lot of people in the group who have been out of Christianity for a long time. And so they're there to kind of help those who are still going through that process. So, we got people who are just barely taking a step out and people who've been out for 20, 30, 40 years and everything in between. So I don't know, 1,200, 1,300 people now, I think we have. And so it is a great place. And sometimes those are the only non-Christian friends that people have is in this group. So if you need a place to go, come look us up. Yep. Got to be on Facebook to do it.
Right. All right. Apologetics.
So do you think that apologetics based on this foundation, this introduction that we've given to apologetics so far, do you think that apologetics helps believers to think critically? And if so, how?
I mean, it's a good question. I would say apologetics does bring one thing to the table. It definitely makes cogent arguments to that certain point, where you can say, okay, this definitely demonstrates something else is going on, or whatever. Not all of them do. Some of the arguments are terrible. But like the cosmological argument, for example, it's decent. It's decent to show that, there's life beyond us. I don't know where that comes from. The argument could just as well be energy as the answer, is my point. Or the Big Bang. I mean, the cosmological argument simply says, look, there's something else starts all this. Great. Okay, good. It takes you somewhere. But it doesn't take you where they think it takes you. So in a sense, it helps you think critically because it just shows that the brain is working a little bit, but it assumes too much and it might dumb you down if you think it proves more than it does. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it can take you in all different directions. I think it does. I think the initial intent is to help people think more critically, but eventually you have to put on some blinders in order to continue going through apologetics. And I think that's where the Christian experts are, and even those who kind of think of themselves as Christian apologists on my Facebook friends, right?
Sure.
They have to put on blinders. They have the same argument over and over and over and over again, and they're not seeing that it actually makes no sense. So,
Sure.
So initially, yes, but I mean, it's just like anything else. I think politics and religion have so much in common, and we see the same cognitive dissonance in both categories often. And so when you know just a little bit about politics, well, you just don't really see, there's not just a big problem or anything. And you just kind of believe, what the politicians say, and you believe what everybody's saying, you believe the news articles, and you believe this and that and the other thing. And that's just like a newbie in church, right? The person who just goes every Sunday, they don't ever read the Bible themselves. They don't study it. They just listen to a sermon here and there, or read a book or something like that. And then the more that you start really, really digging in and critically thinking, whether it's politics or religion, the same thing happens. You either have to admit that there's something wrong. I don't care what you believe politically, you have to admit that there's something wrong with your side, or you just have to put on those blinders and you have cognitive dissonance going on, and you just have decided you're going to just look in your lane and not look anywhere else because there's too many problems out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I see these two as just, they're just two roads going the same direction.
No, that makes sense. So I assume we'll start next episode jumping right into classical apologetics, because we have 5 types of apologetics that we want to talk about. And then a bunch of subcategories for them. And we can't, like Jen said several times in these first 3 videos introducing apologetics, we're going to camp out here for a while. We're going to deal with all the apologetical methods. Make sure you stick around, because just because we don't cover your particular apologetic or the one you think is right, doesn't mean we're making straw men. Trust me, there are, and we'll name famous apologists that you will probably know the name of that believe each of these positions, throughout the weeks. So they're out there. Jen and I are not throwing out straw men, just trying to make a case that we can knock down. No, these are real views, and we are going to dismantle them one at a time, and eventually we'll get to yours. So please be a part of this journey with us. But we're going to start with classical apologetics, and as Jen was just saying with the blinders. See, one of the problems is that once you already believe that God exists, number one, you really don't need apologetics to prove it to you, because you already believe it. But you're using apologetics to substantiate your belief, because it makes you feel better. Like I said in other episodes, that Christianity or religion is the only aspect of your life that you live by faith. Every other one you live by evidence. So you're trying to substantiate your faith in your Christianity or your religion or in God or whatever by adding to it some substance, some evidence. but it's not really doing anything for you because you already believe God exists. So this evidence is not quite actually doing anything to prove Yahweh. So essentially, the weakness of every approach we're going to discuss, particularly apologetics, is that it only points to God as a suggested source beyond ourselves as our beginning. That's the best it does, is it points to him, but it points in 100 different directions. It could be anything. But the circular reasoning Jen was talking about, I think it was last episode, if I remember, that Christian matrix is, I believe God exists. This view points to a God, points to something else. That must be God then. And therefore, since it's God, this view must prove that God exists. And it doesn't do that at all. But that's the circular reasoning. And it's hard to escape that, right? Is that what you see?
Yes. And so let's just end this section here with our courtroom analogy, because I think it kind of wraps it up again. So you've got these two lawyers coming into the courtroom and they give their opening statement. There's my timer. They give their opening statement, and their opening statement is faith-based. That's all it is. They're not presenting any evidence. They're just saying, this is what I think, this is my belief, this is my thoughts, this is what I have faith that this is what my story is the true one, my story is the true one. And then they go into however long it is, and they present all their evidence. And they are looking at literal evidence, and the judge is deciding, is this evidence that we can accept or not, right? And so he's actually determining, is this real evidence? And then at the end, they're coming back and they're giving their conclusion. And that should be a logical conclusion based upon the evidence. So now they're stepping out of their faith, right? They've shown all of their evidence, and they're showing why their faith in the beginning now has an evidence-based conclusion. And so I think that's what we are going to do as we go through all of these different apologetics, is show these different levels and see if we can take them through the courtroom analogy in the next few episodes. Does that sound good, Alan?
That sounds great. Just to quickly just tap off what you just said, and then we'll conclude. Yes, just because your opponent in the court of law hasn't produced evidence for what they think doesn't mean that your evidence is sufficient to prove what you think. So you can't point to that and say, well, because they don't have it, then mine must be right. Well, no. That doesn't mean yours is right. It just means theirs isn't. But it doesn't mean yours is. But that's what Christianity does with science. They say, because science hasn't definitively proven where we come from, then therefore it must be God. That doesn't, filling the gap with God is not an answer. Just because the other few doesn't give a good answer doesn't mean your answer is good. So we have to contend with that. And we have to realize that apologetics does not give the answer just because science doesn't either.
All right. So just like with any addiction that you need to quit, once the brainwashing has been removed, you just pick a time and you stop.
Yep. And this has been a lot of fun. I'm loving this show. So hope you loved it as well. And if you enjoy it, make sure that you like, subscribe, be a part of it. Throw a tip in the tip jar for Jen. She does a lot of work every week to get this show going and to keep you guys engaged. And we hope you'll come and join our community, Life After Christianity community on Facebook. Links below. Jump on there.
All right. Until next time, question your faith with answers from Genesis.